So good day everyone, we are the reporter for today and we're going to discuss about the standard-based assessment including the constructive alignment, K-12 assessment guidelines, which is the content standard, performance standards, and the assessment types.
Hello everyone. So today we are going to tackle about the standard-based assessment. But first, let us define what is standard. Standard is a benchmarks for learning that define what students need to know, understand, and do. So that is the standard means. So now the first bullet is according to Dorothy Strater 2006, an approach that compares students' performances to the standards rather than comparing them with other students. And the next bullet is the measurement of students' learning performance. It is according to predetermined educational content and performance standards. And next is the standard define the skills and knowledge content which should be enhanced by each student, or which will need to be mastered by each student in a certain time frame. Assessment is aligned to the attainment of the standards through the defined skills or competencies. So there are the key principles of effective assessment. These are the outcomes or assessment tasks, criteria, marking procedures, and feedback. So, standard-based assessment is the outcome-based education or performance-based education philosophy. Assessment is a key part of the standards reform movement. The first part is to set new, higher standards to be expected of every student. Then the curriculum must be aligned to the new standards. And finally, the students must be assessed if they meet these standards of what every student must know and be able to do. A high school diploma which is given on passing a high school graduation examination or certificate of initial mastery is awarded only when these standards are achieved. At the end of the process of reform, education officials believe that all students will succeed at a higher level. All will meet local, state, and federal standards which have been set at world-class standards level for the 21st century, though no such standard document has ever existed. So now, what is the purpose of standard-based assessment? It is to know or let the students know against which criteria you will judge their work and the standards attached to each of these criteria. So, take a look at the picture. The picture here is standards-based assessment or grading. The clear feedback to learner and parent and accurate reflection of learning and areas needing development, and separate focus on academic performance, disposition, behavior, attitude, effort, and etc. So that is the standard-based assessment.
Constructive alignment. Constructive alignment is an outcome-based approach to teaching in which the learning outcomes that students are intended to achieve are defined before teaching takes place. So it means that they are focusing to one's outcome of students before they teach what they need to learn. It also gives an organized and constructed learning process. That is why they are focusing on the outcome of the students. Teaching and assessment methods are then designed to best achieve those outcomes and to assess the standard at which they have been achieved. So it means that, or in constructive alignment, assessment is aligned to the intended learning outcomes, and the students construct knowledge through teaching and learning experiences. Next, outcomes-based teaching and learning is based on meeting set standards of teaching and learning to ensure students meet the requirement for a degree. Assessments mark against criteria reference to the outcome. So to make it short, the focus of the constructive alignment is on what and how students learn rather than on the topic the teacher teaches. Learning activities are what the student undertakes to meet these learning outcomes, and students construct knowledge and skills based on the learning activities, provide opportunities for students to construct new knowledge. Constructive alignment is relevant for individual subject as well as the course level. Analysis of learning outcomes and levels of thinking for a subject informs the rationale for assessment, and the design of structured learning opportunities to develop skills and knowledge throughout a subject. So the students should experience a range of learning activities developing from a lower order of thinking to a higher order of thinking across the subject. And then, constructive alignment is relevant for individual subjects as well as the course level. Analysis of learning outcomes and levels of thinking for a subject informs the rationale for assessment and the design of structured learning opportunities to develop skills and knowledge throughout the subject. So, you will start with the subject learning outcomes, then after that you will identify the assessment that meets the learning outcome. Then you will identify now the learning experiences or activities that enable students to meet the assessment that meets the outcome. So that's all for the constructive alignment. Thank you and God bless.
Dated April 1, 2015, Direct Order, Series 2015, entitled Policy Guidelines on Classroom Assessment for the K-12 Basic Education Program. Number 1. In line with the implementation of the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 or Republic Act Number 10533, the Department of Education is adopting the enclosed policy guidelines on classroom assessment for the K-12 Basic Education Program. Number 2, classroom assessment is an integral part of curriculum implementation. It allows the teachers to track the measure learners' progress and to adjust instruction accordingly. Classroom assessment informs the learners as well as their parents and their guardians of their progress. Number 3, effective school year 2015 to 2016, the policy guidelines on classroom assessment for the K-12 Basic Education Program shall be implemented in public elementary and secondary schools nationwide. Number 4, non-DepEd schools are urged to implement these policy guidelines as well. Non-DepEd schools are permitted to modify these policy guidelines according to their school's philosophy, vision, and mission, with the approval of the appropriate DepEd regional office. Number 5, special programs may further issue supplementary guidelines in relation to the program's specific assessment concerns. Number 6, these guidelines will remain in force and in effect for the duration of the program, unless sooner repealed, amended, or rescinded. All existing orders and memoranda that are inconsistent with this order are rescinded. Number 7, immediate dissemination of and strict compliance with this order is directed.
Content standard. Content standard defined as statements that describe what students should know and be able to do within the content of a specific discipline or at the intersection of two or more disciplines. Content standards also articulates core knowledge and skills that students should master. It also guides teachers in identifying instructions on the knowledge or skills that students should learn. Content standards also describes the specific content that should be taught and learned. It also answers the question, what should students know and do? Content standards are broad statements that describe specific content areas that students should learn at each grade level. Content standards also shares the most important and enduring ideas, issues, principles, skills, and habits of mind. Content standards also expresses the desired result. The examples of a content standard are students will classify objects along two dimensions. Second, describe effects of physical activity on the body. Third, present employment-related information in the target language.
Performance standards are the establishment of organizational or system standards, targets, and goals to improve public health practices. Standards may be set based on national, state, or scientific guidelines, benchmarking against similar organizations, the public's or leaders' expectation, or other methods. What is performance standard example? There may be a set of common standards and behavior that are expected from everyone. For example, all supervisors may be expected to perform similarly around several functions, or everyone in the unit will be held to do the same standards around teamwork, customer service, etc. In what ways are performance standards effective? Effective performance standards serve as an objective basis for communicating about performance, enable the employee to differentiate between acceptable and unacceptable results, increase job satisfaction because employees know when tasks are performed well.
So I'm going to discuss about the assessment types under the K-12 assessment guidelines. So there are different types of assessment in learning: the formative assessment, summative assessment, diagnostic assessment, placement assessment, traditional assessment, and the authentic assessment. So the number one types of assessment is the formative assessment. When we say formative assessment, it refers to a wide variety of methods that teachers use to conduct and process evaluation of students' comprehension, learning needs, and academic progress during a lesson, unit, or course. Skills they are having difficulty acquiring, or some learning standards they have not yet achieved. Formative assessment is for learning, and the goal of formative assessment is to collect detailed information that can be used to improve instruction and student learning while it's happening, and also to monitor student learning and to provide ongoing feedback that can be used by instructors to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. So what makes an assessment formative? Because it's not about the design of a test or techniques or self-evaluation, but the way it is used. Example to this is to inform in process teaching and learning modification. So we use formative assessment To number one, to refocus students on the learning process and its intrinsic value rather than on grades or extrinsic rewards, and also to encourage students to build on their strengths rather than fixate or dwell on their deficits. And number three is to help students become more aware of their learning needs, strengths, and interests so they can take greater responsibility over their educational growth. And number four is to give students more detailed, precise, and useful information, and to raise or accelerate the educational achievement of all the students while also reducing learning gaps and achievement gaps. Move on to the second type of assessment, which is the summative assessment. So it is an assessment administered at the end of an instructional unit in a course. So these assessments are intended to evaluate student learning by comparing performance to a standard or benchmark. So they are evaluative rather than diagnostic and are used to measure whether a course learning objectives were met. So, unlike the formative assessment, summative assessments are formal and involve clear instructions, expectations, and grading rubrics to measure student comprehension. So, as I said earlier, summative assessment are used to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement at the conclusion of a defined instructional period. And it is typical at the end of a project, unit, or course, semesters, program, or school year. So, summative assessments are defined by three major criteria. Number one is the test, assignments, or projects are used to determine whether students have learned what they were expected to learn. In other words, what makes an assessment summative? It is not about the design of the test, assignment, or self evaluation, but the way it is used to determine whether and to what degree students have learned the material they have been taught. Number two is summative assessments are given at the conclusion of a specific instructional period, and therefore they are generally evaluative rather than diagnostic. And number three, summative assessment results are often recorded as scores or grades that are then packed into a student's permanent academic record, whether they end up as letter grades on a report card or test scores. The last one, summative assessment results are often recorded as scores or grades that are then factored into students' permanent academic record, whether they end up as letter grades on a report card or test scores used in the college admissions process. The third types of assessment, which is the diagnostic assessment. So a diagnostic assessment is a form of pre-assessment where teachers can evaluate students' strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, and skills before their instruction. So an identical assessment may be given post-instruction to identify if students have met a course required learning objectives. So, so the components of a diagnostic assessment, number one, it happened at the beginning of a unit, lesson, quarter, or period of time. And its goal of understanding students' current position is to inform effective instruction and to identify strengths and areas of improvement for the student. And it also allows stakes assessment. Now we have the placement assessment. It is usually done at the beginning of the school year to determine what the learners already know and what are their needs that could add or improve. Placement assessment or placement evaluation also referred to a pre-assessment or initial assessment. It is conducted prior to instruction or intervention to establish a baseline from which individual student growth can be measured. So this type of an assessment is used to know what the student's skill level is about the subject. And it also helps the teachers to explain the material more efficiently. So these assessments are usually not graded. Another types of assessment in learning is the traditional assessment. So a traditional assessment refers to a standardized testing that uses questions with a limited number of answer choices, and it includes multiple choice, true or false, and some short answer responses. And its purpose is to evaluate if the students have learned the content, to determine whether or not the students are successful in acquiring knowledge, and to ascribe as a grade for them, and to rank and compare them against the standards for the other learners. So now down to the last types of assessment and learning, the authentic assessment. So when we say authentic assessment, it refers to integrating learning and assessment to ensure that students' needs are being met. Authentic assessment is where students thoughtfully apply their acquired skills to a new situation or environment. So assessments are authentic if they are realistic, and it requires judgment and innovation and assess students' ability to effectively use their knowledge or skills to complete a task. And its purpose is to measure students' proficiency by asking them to perform real life tasks and to provide students many avenues to learn and demonstrate best way they have learned. Also to guide them through instruction and to provide feedback and help students to manage their own learning and to also evaluate students' competency. That's all.